History can be found anywhere, even in your own backyard. So join us as we search the land, looking for the stories that helped shape this nation. Come on the porch, grab a drink, and join us for a little bit of history from the homestead. Hey there, history buffs, and welcome to another episode of the History from the Homestead podcast. Today we are talking about gold. Now, I know everybody, when you think of gold, you think of the California gold rush, but actually joining me today is Larry Neal, who we're going to be talking about the original gold rush in North Carolina in 1799. So, Larry, thanks for joining me, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself real quick?
All right, that's great. I am Larry Neal. I am manager of Reed Gold Mine State Historic Site. I've actually been the site manager here since the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. I also worked here before in the 1990s when I got out of college. So I've local to this area with my father grew up in this area, so I'm familiar with this part of North Carolina and really enjoy talking about the history of Cabarrus County.
Wonderful. Now we mentioned it's the Reed gold mine, so we'll start there. Who was John Reed? And I will point out that obviously was not his real name.
Well, we go by John Reed. Now he was German from the Hesse-Kassel region of Germany. He could have been technically Johannes Reeth, but he came to America during the Revolutionary War as a Hessian soldier fighting for the British. He ended up in Savannah, Georgia in 1782 and decided he'd had enough. And he and probably some of his other comrades decided to desert, leave the military service, and work their way back to North Carolina.
Do we know why they headed for North Carolina, or just
the area that we're in between Charlotte up toward Greensboro has historically been a Germanic area of the state. And more than likely, he had heard about this section of the state and worked his way back through here to see what he could find.
I see, kind of like us here in Pennsylvania with our Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch, just kind of everybody gathered here.
That's correct.
So
that's correct.
Now, it was 1799 when he found, well, actually it was his son, I believe, that found the first gold nugget, which is an interesting story. They didn't even know gold wasn't a thing, really.
No, that's right. There is a story that's in the records that says potentially before 1799, somebody found a gold nugget along the Rappahannock River in Virginia, supposedly showed it to Thomas Jefferson, but it was never fully documented. In 1799, his 12-year-old son, Conrad, decided to go fishing in Little Meadow Creek with his siblings and stumbled upon an interesting rock. But he had no idea what it was, and neither did his siblings. But being a typical kid, he decided, if I clean it up really good, take it home, show it to my parents, especially my father, he would know what it was. Well, that's what he did. He cleaned it up, carried it to the homestead, showed it to his father, John. Well, John should have been familiar with gold, having more than likely seen it in Germany as decorations, probably in churches. But in looking at this rock that Conrad found, he had no idea what it was. But he noticed two things about it. It was a rather large rock and a heavy rock. So he said, I'll tell you what, we'll just leave it on the front porch, maybe use it occasionally to prop the front door open and see what it is later.
Wow. Now, my kid brings me rocks all the time, but none of them ever turn out to be gold.
Well, John didn't really know what it was, so he just thought it was just a nice heavy rock that his son had found as well.
Now, how much did this rock weigh? Because this is what's surprising, how big this gold nugget was.
It's reported to be about a 12-pound nugget. So you're looking at something a little bit larger than a softball, probably in size and weight.
Wow. Now we know what gold is now. Could you imagine what that's worth now?
Yeah, gold is a little over $2,000 an ounce right now. So yes, you're talking probably hundreds of thousands of dollars today. But here's the thing. Yes, you have the actual value of the gold in the rock that he found, or any nuggets that people may find today. But there is a collectability for real gold nuggets. So somebody who was very interested in collecting gold nuggets would pay over the actual value of the gold to own it.
Wow.
Now, the neat thing about this particular rock that Conrad found is that they literally left it on their front porch for about 3 years, walking by it every day. In 1802, John and his family were going to Fayetteville, which is the head of the Northeast Cape Fear River, which means any goods coming from Europe into Wilmington to the Cape Fear River can work their way up the Cape Fear and then the Northeast Cape Fear River to the markets in Fayetteville to be sold. So they packed up a wagon to go to Fayetteville for a supply run for his farm, and they decided to throw this rock in the wagon. When they arrived in Fayetteville, he found a jeweler / silversmith who looked at it, supposedly melted it down into a bar about the size of a candy bar today, and asked John Reed to name his price. Well, John thought about it, and he thought about it, and he said $3.50. And the reason why, John was mainly a farmer. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he acquired land. He wanted to be a farmer. That amount to him was about what he hoped to make off his farm in profit as a weekly wage. So he figured for a worthless rock, that should be a fair offer. Here's the problem. The value of the gold then in 1802 was $3,600. So John was only paid 1/10 of 1% of its actual value.
Wow, and that's incredible, because that would have set him for life. Just that one. But
yeah,
hence the name Gold Mine, because there's a lot more to come yet than that one. There was actually, I believe, a bigger nugget found later on.
Well, that's correct. And when John came back to his farm, he realized two things. Gold was on his property, and at some point he realized how valuable that gold was. So he started a partnership with some of his neighbors and others that came in, and they started looking for gold. Well, in 1803, the first full year of mining, one of the enslaved workers on the farm named Peter was looking for gold along the banks of Little Meadow Creek, especially where a tree, because of the way the erosion had occurred, the roots were starting to get exposed underneath the tree, and he saw something shiny up underneath there. So he dug it out. It turned out to be a 28-pound gold nugget. And the descriptions at that time said it was the length and the breadth, or the width, of a plow blade. So you're looking at something now that's about 2 feet, maybe a little bit longer. That became the largest gold nugget ever discovered east of the Mississippi River.
Wow, that's I couldn't even imagine finding something like that. Excuse me. Now, as far as the mining goes, they pretty well did a little of everything, but at first they kind of did I would guess more or less like panning. I guess that's called,
That's correct. It's called placer mining.
Yeah.
Placer is surface mining. And so they really weren't sure where the gold came from. They just started out at the creek and started digging in the creek or along the banks or the sides of the creek. And it's like, literally, if you go home today and just start digging a hole about 3 to 5 feet in your yard, see what you find. You don't find anything, climb out, start digging another hole. When you're done with either your front yard or the backyard, you switch. And if you can't find anything there, maybe start going into your neighbor's yard. But that's placer mining. And they were finding loose gold anywhere from smaller pieces, like the size of your fingernails, up to about some that were the size of your hand throughout the area near Little Meadow Creek over a period of about 20 years.
Wow. Now, this might be getting a little ahead of myself, but it seems to fit. Was gold fairly widespread down there, or was it more or less concentrated to that one area?
It is kind of concentrated. It kind of runs from the Greensboro, Winston-Salem area down through Salisbury and into Charlotte and into upstate South Carolina. But majority of it was between Salisbury, which is kind of in the center of the state, between Charlotte and Greensboro, and Charlotte. So it's kind of Rowan, Cabarrus, Union, and counties where a majority of the gold mines were located in this state.
So he kind of hit the verifiable lottery there.
That is correct. He was in the heart of what became the gold country of North Carolina.
Wow. Now, did they advance their mining any there, or did they just continue the placer mining, or did they get?
Well, they continued it, like I said, from about 1803 until 1825. They were that's all they were doing was surface or placer mining. But in what's now Montgomery County, east of us, toward where now the Uwharrie National Forest area is in North Carolina, it was discovered there by a gold miner that gold was actually coming from white quartz rock. And that's actually what Conrad had found in 1799, was a big chunk of quartz that contained gold. But at that time, they didn't put the correlation together between the quartz and the gold until Matthias Barringer really discovered this in 1825. And that began a change at the Reed mine and other mines in North Carolina that were operating at that time to begin underground or lode mining, when they started sinking shafts deep into the ground looking for quartz. Now, they continued to surface or placer mine all through the years, but they started to concentrate more of their efforts to the underground workings after the middle of the 1820s.
Now, were they more successful with the underground mining, or did they find more on the surface as opposed to the underground?
The surface stuff is loose gold.
Right.
Down in the mine, it is all interspersed with the quartz. And I know at the 50-foot level, in what was called Linker or Vein 4, that became one of the most profitable veins of quartz in the entire mine. And they were finding so much gold mixed in with the quartz that there's really no quartz left underground in that vein. There is some quartz through other veins that did not have a lot of gold, but this particular vein, they were finding so much, they literally blasted every bit of it out, carried it up to the surface, and processed it to extract the gold.
Wow. Now, where would this gold have been sold at for then?
Originally, from the very early 1800s up until the end of right around 1830, a lot of it ended up in Philadelphia to the mint there to be made into gold coins. And at that time, there was what's called the Great Philadelphia Wagon Road that goes from Pennsylvania down through North Carolina into the South. Imagine being on a wagon road for 2 to 4 weeks just to take the gold to a mint in Philadelphia to be made into coins. That is why by 1839, the federal government established a mint for coinage in downtown Charlotte. And so from that point on, any gold found could then be taken just to Charlotte, sold to the mint to be turned into coins. Now, coinage was one of the main uses for gold at that time, but there still were other uses like we would have today: jewelry, other ornamentation that uses for gold that they could sell locally as well.
Now, did any of this gold mining carry on into, say, the Civil War? Because I'm thinking about that. I'm curious about that.
No, actually, the Confederate government at the time of the beginning of the Civil War did not consider gold something worthwhile to the military cause. They were more interested in finding saltpeter and other mining sources that could be used for black powder or weaponry rather than gold. So for the most part, all gold mines in the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, and into Georgia at that time were down between 1861 and 1865, unless they also were able to mine any materials vital to the war effort.
Interesting. That's interesting. Now, when did they stop officially mining there at the Reed mine?
Well, now in terms of John Reed, he passed away in 1845. At that point, the mine turned over to his children and any other partners that he had. And they continued to operate the mine until the Civil War closed it in 1861. After the Civil War ended and they were able to start mining again by 1866 and 1867, the Reed mine actually began to be sold through the years after that through to different people. And one of the actual last owners of the Reed mine were the Kelly family, who were from Springfield, Ohio. They purchased the mine in 1898 and continued to operate it until 1912.
Wow.
After 1912, the mine was considered closed down, but they still allowed neighbors and others to come in and only plaster or surface mine, with the idea that they were supposed to tell them of any large discoveries, but nothing was ever put in the records to them as to what was found. The last large nugget ever found at Reed Gold Mine was in 1896. Matter of fact, that one, when they discovered that nugget, it was one of the men who found it was George Shin, and he owned a store just down the road in Georgeville. And they took this nugget with them to the store and put it on display. And the Smithsonian actually came down and photographed it, made plaster cast of this nugget before it was also eventually sold and turned into other items.
Wow. Now the historic site now is still, I've seen the pictures, the underground mine stuff is still there. Is there any gold still being found there?
No. We since 1912, for the most part, our property has not been an active mine. The state acquired the property from the heirs of the Kelly family in 1971. The state then was able to develop it and open it to the public in 1977. We do not actively mine here except for our panning area. We do have an area set up for the public as they come in. They learn how to pan for gold, and we're still using the same dirt that was pulled out of the creek and alongside the creek for generations. And people are still finding small pieces of gold in that dirt today. But we are not actually mining in terms of the underground mine, but you can go underground. One of our main guided tour takes you 50 feet below the surface through about 400 feet, 400 to 500 feet of original tunnel, and to explain the difference between placer and lode mining and the changes that occurred there because of that. Unfortunately, we're only able to take you 50 feet underground because of the water table. We have no way to remove the water, but our mine originally was 150 feet deep, which is actually very shallow for a gold mine in North Carolina. Some of the mines up towards Salisbury and over to Charlotte were 1,000 feet or deeper into the ground looking for gold.
Wow. Are there any gold mines that are still active there in North Carolina?
There's one gold mine left of the original North and South Carolina gold mining region. It is in Kershaw, South Carolina. It is run by a company, I believe now today, called Oceana Corp. And they are, it's all surface mining, but it is pit mining. It's like strip mining. And instead of using mercury, which is what was mainly used at Reed to mix with the crushed quartz to extract the gold, they're using the cyanide leaching process to extract it.
Wow, that's interesting. I know there's some gold to be found here in PA, but not like that. And ours came down with the glaciers, so
yeah,
we don't have much here.
Pennsylvania's more coal.
Oh yeah, if you want a coal mine, we've got her.
I've been to the exhibition coal mine. I've been through the exhibition coal mine in Pennsylvania years ago.
Wow. So, and that's interesting that you can come down and still see the original tunnel, and that to me, just for me being a history person, that just grabs at me to walk through this, to walk through the same tunnel that they walk through. Their employees or slaves. You mentioned slaves. I'm sure they used that extensively at the time.
Well, in the South, yes, before the Civil War, enslaved workers were used. Now, one thing too is John Reed, even though this mine increased in profits, he still kept his farm. As a matter of fact, he used the profits from the mine to increase his farm.
Yeah.
We have about 840 acres of land today, which was mostly John Reed's farm. But in the heyday of John's farm, he had over 1,000 acres here. But by the time the Kellys acquired it in 1898, there was only about 840 acres left of the original farm. So John always liked farming. He liked the gold and mining, but he also liked to keep up the farming as well.
Wow. That makes me think of an interesting question. Originally, when he ended up with land, how big would his farm have been?
That's what I'm saying. It's the records we have is just over 1,000 acres.
Yeah.
And today it's mostly intact. As a matter of fact, looking at the map of our property today compared to the property of it at the time of his death in 1845, it is very, very similar in the outlying markers for the property.
Okay. All right. Well, what would someone expect then if they'd come to visit? I mean, what do you have anything original there, I should say?
Well, what we have for visitors that come today, we have a visitor center that you can go through. We have a lot of original mining tools and equipment on display. We have a 15-minute orientation film on the history of gold in North Carolina. Then you can either take a self-guided tour or a guided tour of the underground mine. Just depends on which you like. We have about 3 miles of walking trail around the property that takes you all around the original mining areas, from Upper Hill, Middle Hill, and Lower Hill is what they were known. To take you around those. And then we are projected by the beginning of March to have our stamp mill operating again for the public to show how by the end of the 1890s into the early 1900s, the way that they would have crushed the quartz rock, mixed it with the mercury to extract the gold. And it is one of the few operating stamp mills left in the United States.
Wow. So now that's anybody who listens to this show, you have to go to North Carolina now. That's just the way it works. If you listen, you have to visit. So Well, is there anything else? Anything else you have to add yet, Larry, before we start to sign off? Anything
Well, I was
we
going to
missed?
say, if anybody is interested in visiting us, we have our YouTube channel. You can see a lot of videos that we've created on talking about the history of the site, plus a lot of the mining tools and stuff and how they were used on the site. We have a Facebook page that has all of our information on it that you can look up as well as our standard website. All you have to do is just type in Reed Gold Mine State Historic Site on your favorite internet browsers, and you should be able to find us very easily.
Wonderful. And I will as well share those links on any of our pages, which did incidentally how I found you by accident. I found about the Reed Gold Mine by accident on YouTube. Never heard of it before 3 weeks ago.
Well, a lot of people do associate California now. I mean, that is true. When the California strike hit in 1848 at Sutter's Mill, and then everybody started the rush to California by 1849 and 1850, they were finding way more gold than what was ever found in the rest of the United States. But we were first. The gold literally went east to west and then north up into Alaska, which is why, in part, Alaska became a state because of all the gold and other things that were found up in that area.
Wow. Oh my. So, well, Larry, I thank you for joining me to talk about the gold mine, and hopefully everybody, like I said, that if you listen to the podcast, you just have to go. That's one of my rules. I'm going to tell everybody now. So,
well, I thank you for inviting me to come on to your podcast, and I invite all those listeners to look us up, give us a call, come on down, and as they used to say, strike it rich.
There you go. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Remember, if you like the show, you can share it with all your friends. We can be found on all the major podcast players. We can be found on Facebook, and you can also find us and catch the show notes at historyfromthehomestead.com.